Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, this is great.
Awesome. Could you please introduce yourself to our listeners, to those who don't know who you are?
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Evan Harris. I was a teacher and administrator in the independent school world in the United States, in Arizona and Texas. Taught English and did some sort of administrative work for schools, and then ended up getting my master's in private school leadership through Teachers College in New York. Decided I didn't really want to be an administrator. I didn't want to be a head of school, which is sort of the grand ambition of a lot of people who are in my program. And instead, really was falling in love with education technology. And it seemed like things were going to change more in the next few years than they had in the last 30 years, right? That we were at the beginning of sort of an exponential curve. And I wanted to be part of that because I saw kind of a divide between the people who are making education technology and the practitioners and the people who really understand learning science and pedagogy and kind of organizational development, right? Like how schools actually function on the ground. And I wanted to be a conduit between those two communities, frankly. So I ended up deciding not to come back to teaching, and I created just sort of my own course of study that involved like going to Stanford and studying AI and tech, ethics, like learning Python, got my Scrum Master certification, studied at the Conversation Design Institute, built my own chatbots. And now I have a company, and basically, what we do is we go into schools for these multi-month partnerships, and we work with the faculty on faculty training and development. We work with staff on automating staff tasks. We help students with their own AI projects. And our kind of grand thesis as a company is that in creating all of these small wins, these little successes all over the school, you can
Mm,
begin to, I don't know, kind of create change, to sustain change, and to kind of set the stage for change, right? AI in schools, our feeling is not a tech problem so much as it's a people problem, right? This is a very
yeah,
emotional issue for schools. So our thinking is that in working at all levels of the organization and helping them with kind of create narratives of success, that
yeah.
people will look at those stories and go, oh, I guess AI is not this scary thing. It's actually doing real good for real people. Let's think about how we can thoughtfully embrace it.
Yeah, but it's great, and it seems like your journey actually is the perfect definition of how education should be about. Should be
Mhm.
about curiosity, about learning, constantly learning new things,
Mhm.
whether you are a student or an educator yourself as a school teacher.
Yeah.
Um, so could you explain to us the importance of AI literacy for students and educators in today's tech-driven world? You know, the tech is going at such a fast pace.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So I would say that, unfortunately, I do deal with a lot of schools where our first conversation tends to be them saying something like, well, we're thinking about buying all of these AI tools, and we're
Yeah.
just going to spend a ton of money buying a bunch of tools. We're going to give them to our faculty and, like, problem solved, box checked. And unfortunately, that's just not the way this works. It's not as easy as just buying a product and all of a sudden your school is now like an AI school, whatever the hell that means, right? What it actually entails, really, at least partially, is an understanding of AI safety and AI ethics. That's, I think, the biggest foundation for AI literacy.
Right.
Before you bring in any AI tool with young people, this is a vulnerable population. You really have
Yeah.
to understand what you're getting involved with. So that includes kind of media literacy. It includes understanding AI's climate impact, its impact on exploited workers, particularly in the
Yeah.
developing world, an understanding of hallucinations and objectivity, some basic prompting skills. All of those things are a prerequisite to AI in schools.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, rushing to put AI into every aspect of your school community is the wrong approach. But so too is kind of like a, well, let's just wait and see kind of approach that I think a lot of schools that have been successful for many years tend to kind of want to rest on their laurels a little bit, look at what other people are doing, and maybe try to copy and paste policy. But
Right.
so much of the benefit of creating an AI policy is the conversations that you have within your own school community about creating that policy, and the mechanisms that you're able to create in your community to continually iterate on those policies, because like you're saying, it's not like you can create a policy or create a training program and you're done. The technology is going to look very different in a year from now and 2 years from now.
Exactly.
It's 10xing every year the amount of compute that we're committing to these models.
Yeah.
So the smart schools are thinking not just about AI literacy, but also what does it look like to stay up to date with this in a year or 2 years? And so much of what school leaders do is around planning and forecasting. And this is a very difficult issue for them to plan and forecast. So it becomes especially necessary to think more about systems and organizational development.
Yes, exactly. And it's very interesting that you brought up media literacy, because up till maybe a couple of years ago, we were all, I'm an educator myself. I'm a
Mhm.
coach. I coached a lot of young people on media, worked at BBC. So I did media trainings
Mhm.
for a lot of people. But so we talked a lot about it, especially social media. And now we're talking about AI. What would be the common traits between AI training or knowing, being AI literate and being
Mhm.
social media or media literate, and in terms of things to learn, but also in terms of safety, how to use these two things safely. And I feel like there's a lot of
Yeah.
convergency there.
Yeah, 100%. You're exactly right. There's the good news and the bad news. The bad news is that
Start
AI,
with the
and
bad news.
yeah, let's start with the bad news.
That's good. It's fair. Get
Yeah,
it out of the
yeah.
way.
I don't know why I did that automatically,
That's good.
but yeah. So we'll start with the bad news. The bad news is that, and this isn't a surprise to you or to your listeners, but these models are creating images, video that are becoming so photorealistic that the line between what is real and what is not real is getting blurrier, right?
Mhm.
And we're already seeing people I can create, honestly, with this video, I don't want to give anybody any ideas, but with this video, someone could grab our voice, could create
Mhm.
an AI clone using like 11 labs or something,
Yeah.
find the phone number for somebody in our life and call them up. And I know there've already been people who've gotten scammed, like, hey, mom and dad, I'm applying for such and such, and they need my social security number. Do you remember what it is? And all of a sudden they're giving a social security number, right? That's already happened. Some really dark stuff like fake nudes. We saw this with Taylor Swift on X recently. That dark stuff has already kind of arrived. And it's going to become really difficult to combat, especially I think for our political discourse. Our
Mhm.
discourse in the United States is
For
already in,
elections.
yeah, our discourse in the United States is already insane.
Yeah.
And it's about to get worse, unfortunately. Here's the good
Where are you
news.
talking to us from? Where are you right now?
I'm in
Mhm.
the belly of the beast. I'm in Washington, D.C. So yeah, I'm right here.
Yeah.
Um, but the good news is that there have been people who've been doing really good work on media literacy for years now.
Mhm.
And the human brain is not any different today than it was 5 years ago. So those kind of fundamental psychological principles like heuristics, confirmation bias, the way that people create implicit and explicit filters for their news so they can kind of create little bubbles and echo chambers for themselves where they don't have to encounter opposing viewpoints.
Right.
All of that is the same today as it was 5 years ago. So we know a lot about why people disagree, and how to get people to work together. There's a guy named Dan Shapiro at Harvard who does really good work on this. And basically, what he says is that our most fervent disagreements as a culture are disagreements about identity,
Mhm.
right? It's
Definitely.
disagreements about our core values. So we're not just disagreeing about an issue, we're disagreeing about something very deep and fundamental to who we are. And that's why it's so triggering. And until you've really shown the other person that you're willing to kind of steel man their argument and
Right.
listen to them and say, you know what, that makes sense. You don't have to say you agree with it, but you have to at least show them, you know what, I've heard you. I understand the value you're defending, even if it's not my value. Once you're willing to do that, you're opening the door to turn me versus you into us versus the problem or us
Right.
versus something else. And then it's kind of how do we find common ground? So people have been doing this work for a long time. It's just becoming so much more necessary that students learn these soft skills because we're adding gas to the fire, frankly, with AI.
Right. So it actually feels like teachers shouldn't be worried about losing their jobs to AI, because the
No.
real job is actually teaching their students soft skills, as you
Mhm.
put it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, so the robots are coming, kind of the sky is
exactly.
falling thing. I definitely hear it. I understand where it's coming from, certainly culturally and in terms of the news media. I would argue, and I think basically every expert I know in the space argues the same thing, which is that teachers are fine because what we do is so human. It's so collaborative. It's so kinetic. It's so messy. It's so relationship driven. Students need your authenticity. They need your weirdness, right? Like the
Mm,
classroom, I'll give a quick example. Like most teachers have been in this situation before where a student arrives to class and they look like they've just been crying or something. They look really upset.
oh,
Show me an
mm,
AI that can deal with that in a sensitive way.
all
Like,
right.
come on. Like
Yeah,
the classroom is full of variables, right? Like it
exactly.
reminds me of, they're trying to teach cars how to drive, but what happens when
Yeah,
it snows, right? It's the same thing for the classroom. The classroom has all kinds of variables that are just too strange, frankly, for an
yeah,
AI to handle. So I think we're heading toward a future where AI gets integrated thoughtfully, takes some of the drudgery, the repetitive tasks out.
right.
But what comes in its place is the higher order thinking, the
Mm,
collaborative work, the real
yeah,
world application, the authentic assessment, where teachers don't become less necessary, they become more necessary.
exactly. And it feels like, critical thinking, it feels like we need to go back to the basics,
Mhm.
in this conversation. So yes, tech is going, it's we're developing tech, but it's not going to take over. And also critical thing is important. Like, few skills are now our, I'm a father to two children.
Mhm.
And to me, it's more important for them to always question things
Mhm.
than to just memorize a lot of facts and
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of data, right? So I think with
Yeah.
AI we need, but I have a little concern about it. Well, it's not a
Mhm.
concern, but it's actually, I wonder. Obviously, AI, because it's been brought up in many articles lately that AI is being like biggest companies, AI companies are being developed in maybe woke places, or in California. So there are political agendas
Yeah.
behind those who develop AI.
Yeah.
So can this impact our use of this technology, or should we again go back to critical thinking and always question what AI gives us in terms of content?
Yeah. So certainly like, you want to model for your students kind of questioning the output and
Mm,
dissecting what it's giving you, right? AI, at least right now, is going to give you often very kind of bland, mediocre, B plus kind of outputs. It just is, unless even prompted very, very well, certainly for things like essay writing. So I think, showing students that, hey, this thing does make mistakes because it's only trained on sort of a chunk of the internet. There are mistakes in that. When it hasn't been extensively trained on something, it's going to try to fill in the gaps of its knowledge and give you something that sounds plausible but may in fact be wrong.
right.
So students need to be aware of the objectivity problems, the bias problems, hallucinations. They have to be aware of all those things. From a political perspective, to be honest, like you're absolutely right that kind of we talk a lot about the positives of having a human in the loop, right? But there are also some drawbacks to that, which is, well, who's making these decisions about what's real and what's not, and what's appropriate and what's not? That gets problematic pretty quickly. What worries me more, though, I think, is that we may be heading toward a future where these AI systems are hyper personalized. And in
Mhm.
education, we talk about that as a really positive thing. But what happens when those echo chambers I was talking about before are now AI powered, and you have a sort of hyper conservative version of AI and a hyper
Mhm.
liberal version of AI, and people get to live in their own little world with an AI that only tells them what they want to hear and maybe misrepresents things. I saw a study, I think my mom actually sent it to me. They had climate deniers talking to AI. And I don't know how long the session was, but they came out of it much more open to the idea that climate change is real. So I do think that there is maybe a place for AI in helping people who have been kind of frankly victimized by conspiracy theories and things that are just blatantly wrong, like climate denial, to kind of come back to reality a little bit. but you're right that who gets to make these decisions about what's real and what's not is a huge ethical problem.
Definitely, it has. Offline, we talked a lot about how you're about Europe, the Middle East, and how
Mhm.
your important work could impact
Mhm.
schools beyond the United States.
Yeah.
A region like the Middle East has a lot of has tens of thousands of schools. It
Mhm.
has a very young population.
Yep.
Could you tell us a little bit about, your plans or how you would envision, your work, you working there with the schools that in the region?
Yeah, 100%. So maybe we could talk maybe at first sort of about Saudi, and
Yeah,
then a little bit about Egypt as well, where I'm sure you
yeah,
know a lot more than I
yeah,
do.
yeah.
So when looking at Saudi Arabia, I think, it's tempting to just sort of start with MBS's Vision 2030, but it's helpful, I believe, to sort of set a foundation in terms of looking at the current economy and also a little bit of sort of Saudi Arabian history, like how did they end up where they are today? So right now, something like 85% of Saudi exports are from oil, and it makes up about 40% of GDP. That sounds like a lot, but it's actually probably understated because of that remaining 15% of exports. A huge chunk of that is oil derivative products like plastics and industries that are subsidized by the government using oil revenue, right? So this is still an economy really propped up by huge revenues from oil. They're the number one fossil fuel exporter in the world. They're the only swing producer in the world, meaning they're the only producer who can quickly ramp up production, which gives them huge political power. Your listeners are not going to be surprised by that, right? But it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So if you look back at Saudi when they first found oil in like 1933, this is a country that didn't have good infrastructure for electricity, really low life expectancy, didn't even really have safe water. If you look at Saudi by the middle of the 20th century, things are really starting to change, right? The sort of GDP per capita is just exploding through the 20th century, right? So they have been liberated in many ways by oil. The problem is that when you have a single resource that is propping up your economy, your currency becomes very strong as a result of that export. And then your other exports can't compete, right? Because you have this really strong currency that other people can't purchase your other exports. So you're almost cursed by your wealth or by your single export, right? So that brings
Definitely.
us to 2030, which is MBS's vision he came out with in 2016, where he's basically saying, like, we need to diversify our private sector because right now you have something like 4 million Saudi citizens. And of those, I think like only 600,000 work in the non-oil private sector, right? For a lot of that sector, they are importing in workers from other countries for relatively low pay to do kind of menial work. So they're in desperate need of diversification. And that's going to come in the form of tech, mining, especially mining for minerals that are necessary for the green transition, which is really what they're thinking about. They're
Yeah.
thinking about agriculture. They're thinking about tourism, especially around the Hajj and
Mhm.
trips to Mecca. They're thinking about bringing women more into the economy, and they've already made huge strides. They've actually already beaten their goal that they had for 2030. And they're thinking about education. So the education
Special
piece is,
education. Yeah.
yeah,
Go
so
ahead.
the
Yeah.
education piece is really, really important because if you're trying to compete with the UAE predominantly and other Gulf states for foreign investment, you've got to be able to show like, hey, we have workers. We have workers who are ready to kind of jump into startups and ready to work into this more diversified economy. But you're going to have an education system that can support that. So I would suggest that, like a lot of countries in the Gulf and Egypt as well, that they could benefit in some ways from a more American model. The American model is flawed in a lot of ways. And there's a big difference between our worst public schools and our, let's say, best public schools and best private schools. But one thing the United States does very well, I believe, is that we do a lot of project-based learning, a lot of entrepreneurship. American students think automatically about design, solving problems, working collaboratively, discussion, debate, a much more kinetic form of learning. I think that's going to create the kinds of students who can start companies, who can innovate, That's, I think, what the Saudis are going to need to fulfill that vision. So they're going to need a new kind of curriculum. They're going to need teachers who are trained. They're going to need to leverage technology in ways they never have before. But they have a massive opportunity. And the last thing I'll say is, they've got the runway to do this. They've got favorable oil prices. They've got a favorable debt to GDP ratio. They've got some competition for this investment, like I said, but they have the means to do this, and they're already making huge progress and huge strides. It's just a matter, I think, of making education very central to that effort.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned this. You mentioned even assessments, because it's actually, there's the concern of AI and assessments. Of many teachers down there, many schools I spoke to in the Middle East, but also in Europe, and I guess in the States as well.
Yep.
They wonder, okay, but AI, how can I assess my students, correctly,
Yep.
and fairly, with AI being around
Mm.
us. And I
Yeah.
know you have a very special take on this, and that I
Yep.
really like a lot. Could you please share with us your
Sure.
idea?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
So the way that you and I were probably assessed when we were in school, and the way that a lot of the world still assesses, including the United States, is called like traditional assessment. And traditional assessment is basically like, I'm going to give you a bunch of information, you're going to cram it, you're going to recite it back to me after that you've memorized it. And if you promise to do that, I promise I will never assess you on it ever again, except for maybe an exam. So there's nothing transferable happening. There's no real world application. There's no formative feedback. Learning is not a process. It's a single product that you deliver to your teacher, right? We know from years of learning science that this is not the best way to actually assess students. There's nothing deep and durable about that sort of learning. It's not actually learning. And the worst part of it is if you ask a student, hey, what did that essay mean to you? What did that test mean to you? They'll have no answer. What it meant was me getting an A so I can move on to
Yeah,
the next thing.
exactly.
They don't care. So they're not given an opportunity to connect what they're learning with their identity, with their passions, with their curiosities, with problems they want to solve, with communities they want to take part in. That's authentic assessment. It's where we're thinking about learning much more as an iterative process. We're giving students more agency to decide the medium and mode through which they demonstrate their learning. We know that this works, and AI can actually support it. The problem is that we have teachers who look at that and they go, well, that sounds good, but that also sounds like a lot of work, and I have
Mhm.
this much bandwidth. And
Yeah.
also, I've been doing this for 20 years. And also, this is the way I was taught. That's a lot
Right.
to get over. So you really have to look for those places where AI can support that transition to authentic assessment and make it easier. And my company helps teachers with that. It's actually our main thing we help them with. And it surprises some teachers because when they hear we're going to do AI training, they think, oh, we're just going to jump on ChatGPT and start prompting away, and are surprised to learn that to the extent we talk about AI, we're really talking about AI ethics and AI safety. And the rest of it is just authentic assessment, because students who are assessed this way are less likely to want to cheat because they
Mhm.
find meaning in their work, and they're less able to cheat using AI because AI is not very good at replicating process and
Right.
collaboration and real world application. It's really good at replicating product. So it is taking our traditional assessments and lighting them on fire. And I'm
Mhm.
frankly kind of happy about that because we should have made this transition years ago.
Yeah. So in other words, you're advocating for a more project-based way to assess our students.
Yeah.
I got three questions from
Sure.
my followers on LinkedIn.
Oh,
The first
cool.
question for you, actually, you were the mysterious guest, so I'm very
Okay.
happy that today I'll be able to share with my followers that I had you on the podcast.
Nice.
The first one is actually, what steps should educational institutions, or schools, take to prepare both educators and students for a future increasingly shaped by AI? Like, how can we prepare
Yeah.
even starting with the teachers, how can we prepare them to use to coexist with
Yeah.
AI?
Yeah. So I would say a couple of things. So the first one is just to create a common vocabulary for even talking about AI. Like, what are these systems? How are they trained? Not to take too deep of a dive into computer science because
Mm.
people are just going to be glazed over. Like they don't, it's too much, right? But you have to at least have some common vocabulary for what are these systems? How do they work? What are the ethical and safety challenges of using them? And to do that in a way that feels very, very accessible to non-technical people.
Mm.
The fact is, though, you're going to have, and studies are showing this already, you're going to have something like 30 to 50% of faculty members who are resistant or highly resistant to using AI. So what you also don't want to do, I don't think, is push really, really hard. A message of, hey, the world is changing and you need to change with it is going to fall really flat. A message of, we owe it to our students to make sure they're prepared. Let's take another look at how we're assessing. And even if they're just doing one authentic assessment per month or something like that, that's a start. Teachers, students, staff members, leadership, they all need to see kind of small wins. They need to see stories popping up in their community that things are being done in a successful way for them to buy into the vision that more success is coming, right? So I'm a big believer in this idea of small wins, narratives, planting them all over the place and giving people a sense that yes, things are changing, but they're changing in a positive way. The other thing I would say for faculty just quickly is that there is kind of this misconception that teachers fear change. I don't believe that's true.
I
Teachers
know.
can be
Okay.
let me see if I can defend that. So I don't think
Yeah.
teachers just inherently fear change,
Mhm.
but if they're feeling fear and anxiety, it's because they're fearing the loss that can sometimes accompany change. So that's loss of autonomy, loss of their sense of routine, their sense of purpose. That's what they're afraid of losing there. And that's what you're dealing with when you're encountering those anxieties around AI. So I
Right.
think listening to those teachers, honoring their sense of anxiety and resistance because it's well founded. We've been through a lot in the last couple of years in the classroom, right? They're not saying this for no reason. So I think listening to them, taking them seriously, those people who are resistant, not pushing them too hard, giving them a message about what's going to change and also frankly what's going to stay the same is really important. That's how I would approach faculty. It's a soft kind of push. Yeah.
That sounds very interesting, and I think this is part of what your business, what you guys are doing, is
Yep.
you're educating teachers on AI, not only integrating AI within the educational system. Could you please share with us some success stories or case studies that could be, you know, relevant to markets like in the Middle East or in Europe or in the States?
Yeah, 100%. So, a lot of the success stories we're having, and I don't want to give too much away because this is actually one of the most successful things we're doing. You have a good idea when you kind of don't want to talk about it because it's
Yeah,
that good.
really.
So a lot of what we're doing in schools is happening on the staff automation side. Those are some of the biggest successes we're having. And frankly, we do this in combination with working with students on student AI projects, working with faculty on training, because we're taking this holistic system-wide approach to narrative, to quick wins, to system change. But to get a little more specific, I'll tell you, right now, one of the things we're doing is we're working with admissions departments and college counselors, and we interviewed them and we said, what is some of the repetitive work you're doing, right? The drudgery, the stuff that's just taking up a ton of your time, but is not especially meaningful. And what they told us is they said, we're spending hours and hours and hours every month conducting
Mhm.
interviews for prospective students, for students who are considering applying to different colleges. And the real work comes from all the note taking that we have to do and the organizing of those notes. We're interviewing, in some cases, over 100 students. It just takes so long. And so my team and I were listening to that and we said, well, wait a second. We can have something like Firefly's AI or Otter automatically transcribe those meetings. We can send that output text into a large language model through like the OpenAI API with prompts that we design with you to extract the key insights you're interested in. And then we can post those key insights to Google Sheets or to your learning management system or to, the school equivalent of a CRM. And so you could literally walk from your interview into your office to find that you already have notes organized for you and recordings of the transcript, which then means that you, as the interviewer, are able to be present in the interview
Mhm.
and you're not down here taking notes. And so they heard that and they thought, wow, that will save us a ton of time. It'll mean that we're more human, more available, more present in those interviews. And so those kind of moments of, oh my gosh, you guys can build that for us? That sounds incredible. That's one of my favorite parts of the job. And if you imagine a faculty member overhearing this story at lunch or in a meeting, and they go, "Oh, wow, I didn't know AI could do that." And now, because they have this time savings, they're able to do more of the human, strategic, meaningful work they're interested in. That's the kind of narrative we're planting all over the place. And our thinking is that if we plant enough of those seeds, we're going to be able to do something really special with that school and kind of set the stage for change.
Some school personals might feel threatened though by the fact
Mhm.
that you are actually integrating systems that take on repetitive tasks. What would you
Mhm.
say to those people?
Yeah, so I love that question because what's really funny is I do kind of get that sometimes of it's a the robots are coming kind of fear. But when we tell them, hey, listen, the only thing that's a really good use case for automation are tasks that are repetitive, mundane, time consuming, involve moving information from one place to another. Typically, that is the worst part of your job. It's not the part of your job that you're dying to do. It's the drudgery. It's the part no one wants to do.
Right.
So it then frees you up to do the stuff you're actually interested in. So far, when we propose these use cases to people, um, first of all, they're kind of interested and flattered by the fact that we're so careful about learning why they do what they do and how they do it, so we can automate it in a way that they will actually use. But secondly, they realize, oh, wait a second, yeah, the robots are coming, but they're coming for the absolute worst part of my job that I'm very happy to give away.
Right. So they shouldn't be
Yeah,
afraid. Shouldn't be worried.
definitely not.
Uh,
Definitely not.
any last thoughts or anything else you would like to add to what you said, mainly in terms of education, AI, and future plans? Because I know that you guys are going global soon, or
Mhm.
you've already started.
Yeah.
Um, any interesting plans? Could you share with us in
Yeah.
terms of projects?
Yeah, so I'm starting. I just got in my proposal, and I'm fairly certain it's coming through. I'm going to do a 3-part course with the Northwest Association of Independent Schools, working with school leaders in a 3-part course that covers kind of what we talked about today. I'm working tomorrow with the Southern Association of Independent Schools, training executive assistants, like people who assist heads of school. So that's really exciting. I'm hoping to publish in NAIS magazine coming up soon to tell them about the work we're doing in schools. Um, yeah, I mean, it's what's getting exciting is that there's more and more incoming interest into what we do. More and more schools are realizing that while it sounds like they're taking on a lot, to engage in a multi-month process with us is a lot
Mm.
better in terms of the results they're going to see than if they just threw a bunch of money into ed tech. So that feels like less of an uphill battle. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm excited. I think there are going to be a couple conferences that I'm going to be speaking at in the next few months, which is exciting too. I'm definitely afraid of public speaking, but I will prepare, so I think I'll be
You
okay.
don't come across as a person who's afraid of public speaking.
I appreciate. I just prepare and prepare and prepare, and that's how
Yeah.
I get my nerves down. But yeah, no, I'm really excited. I mean, I'm excited to just one last thing to hear about potentially working in Egypt. I think that would be really exciting. I won't go too deep into Egypt, but one thing I think tells you a lot about what they need to do in the direction they need to head is they're busy building this new administrative capital. This is going to be a city of 6 million people. But because of the way the city is laid out and because of the expense of living there, very few Egyptians right now are actually going to be able to move into that capital. The average cost of a house there is $80,000, and you're going to need a car because of the way the city was planned.
Yeah.
So they're creating these districts for business. They want to diversify as well, but they're going to need an educated population to come in and do it. And right now they have overcrowded classrooms, teachers without the proper training, a curriculum that is not matched up with really 21st century jobs. So foreign investment is interested in Egypt, especially because Egypt is sort of a mediator with Gaza right now. And
Yeah.
historically, that's what they've been. So there's more of an appetite to work with Egypt than there has been recently. They do have some struggles with regard to debt, but I still believe that Egypt can do a lot. They've like a huge population, the young country, like you said, they're ready for growth, but it's going to require a real commitment to 21st century education. So to the extent that we're able to work with the Egyptian government and Egyptian schools, I'd be thrilled to do that as well.
Definitely, and I'm so excited, and I really love your energy. And the first time we spoke, I was impressed by all the important work that you guys are doing, and and I think we should do something in the Middle East very soon.
Yep.
Education is number one priority for many of those countries. It's the
Yeah.
future of the nation. So if you want to actually to improve a nation, you need to focus on the young people, on the young generation. So I'm really looking forward to working with you, Shawaly
Me too.
International, and with your company. I- If we want to get in touch with you or find out, find out about more,
Sure.
find out about more of the stuff
Mhm.
you're doing, where can we find you online?
Sure. So my website is evanharris.ai. I think my LinkedIn is like LinkedIn/EvanHarrisAI. But I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. We're in the next couple of months going to cut a commercial with about 5 of the schools, the independent schools, and also a few international schools, so that they can talk directly to camera about the experience they've had with the company. So we're working with these schools right now in this multi-month process. I'm playing it a little bit close to the chest in terms of what exactly we're doing because I think it's so valuable and I do have competition in the space. But eventually, pretty soon here, we're going to kind of open things up, let those schools talk about their experience of working with us. And I'd be very excited to start sharing more openly about the process we've created for these schools because I can tell you it's working. And it's working a lot better than just, like I said, buying a bunch of ed tech or, putting 2 new paragraphs in your student handbook. Like that's not a serious approach to AI. I think we've kind of cracked the code on what's working in school. So I'm going to be excited to share it.
Definitely, and yeah, you should also think about translating it to other languages in
Yeah,
your ad in the future. It's
sure.
very interesting, very important, and I think it's going to be relevant for years to come. Because
Yep.
as you said before, it's not only about adapting new AI technologies and just buying a bunch of AI tools and that's it, but
Yep.
also you need to prepare the ground, you need to
Yep.
educate, and then stay up to date.
Yeah.
Right.
Dude, you're singing my song. So at 100%, I agree.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah.
And
Thanks for having me, man. This was fun.